The conventions are over and the race has tightened, but how much and how does it affect Biden's overall lead in the Electoral College from last month? Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. It's time for another look at the status of the presidential campaign and where the Electoral College stands right now after we've passed the traditional post-Labor Day starting point for the general election campaign as of last week. It's been a while since I've done one of these and we've had a ton of new polls and a lot of new subscribers. So for anyone new here, welcome, and let me explain how this works. I've gone over the polls leading up to and including September 15th. Now, these results are often different than the election night videos most of you have probably seen, and if you haven't, I'll link to the most recent one at the end of this video, because those are basically written by a spreadsheet that tracks polls and historical data to simulate the election. They never have any input from me at all, where these videos are just my analysis of what I think would happen if the election were held today based on where the polls stand at the moment. If those types of videos interest you, then please consider liking and subscribing for more election videos from now through Election Day and well beyond. Now back to this video, where right now there are 5 huge states with a total of 93 electoral votes, where the leader is ahead by an average of less than 2 points. Let's get started. As always, we start with the states that nothing short of a political tsunami will change because either one candidate has consistently led by 10 points or more, or if there hasn't been any polling, that party's nominee has consistently won by double digits over the years. This is the base that both candidates are starting with, and it has former Vice President Joe Biden in the lead with 212 electoral votes. President Trump trails with 88 electoral votes. I know that sounds like a lot, but it should be noted the president won all but 3 of those states back in 2016, and those 3 only total 20 electoral votes, meaning the president doesn't even have to hold all of them or expand what he won 4 years ago to win re-election. There are a few more gray states than usual because a number of states over the last month have fallen back into question thanks to polling done since the last video. Let's start with the likely states. The inclusion of Arkansas in this group is surprising, but there has been some polling showing cracks in the president's armor. Now, it was only one poll, but it's also the only poll that's been done in the state that once called Bill Clinton governor. Arkansas has been solidly Republican since the 90s, and while that state shows Biden closing in, I'm not changing its status until we get more than just one poll in there, likely Republican. Kansas has been a bit of a head-scratcher all year long, with a Senate seat showing the Democrat ahead with one candidate and behind but close with the other. Well, Republicans nominated the other, and initial polls confirmed that it was close. Then there are the 2 August polls showing Trump with only a 7-point lead. That's a good-sized lead, but I say only because only one Democrat has won the state in the last 80-plus years, and the last Democrat to lose by less than 14 was Michael Dukakis back in 1988. These are, however, the 2 most recent polls, and both are only about a month old at that. It shouldn't be, but unless further polling shows the president regaining that double-digit lead, this is only likely Republican. Alaska is another state that has no business being here. The most recent state to join the Union, Alaska has voted in just 15 presidential elections, and only one of those times was for a Democrat. In fact, only one Democrat since 1968, over 50 years, has even gotten more than 38% of the vote, let alone one. That, by the way, was Barack Obama back in 2012 for his re-election campaign. And yet, there have been 3 polls, not 1, not 2, 3, since the 4th of July showing the president with leads of 1, 3, and 6 points. That historical trend has to make Trump the favorite right now, but it cannot be considered solid until some blowout leads start showing up on what should be a lot of polls coming our way after a bunch of close ones, likely Republican. Montana is the only northern Mountain West state that Democrats have been able to crack in the last 56 years, with Clinton narrowly winning the 3-way race in his first election back in 1992. He lost in 1996, but by less than 3 points. Republicans have otherwise done very well there on the presidential level, but voters don't hesitate to pull the lever for Democrats in other elections. This year's Senate race is an example, with it starting off close, but Republican incumbent Senator Steve Daines has taken a small but consistent lead over popular two-term Democratic Governor Steve Bullock. The presidential level isn't as close as the Senate race, but Trump's numbers cratered back in May, going from a 20-point lead to only a single-digit lead, and that has been consistent. The president's numbers are hovering right around the 50% mark, though, which makes a flip unlikely, but Biden does continue to rise in the numbers. Still, high single-digit leads are still comfortable leads, so likely Republican. Everyone knows the story of how Missouri used to be a bellwether state. Then it started voting for Republicans all the time, keeping the appearance of still being a swing state when they won, but now it's even when they lose. Proof? Republicans won, even though Obama won twice. That's 5 straight elections for the Show Me State going for the GOP nominee, win or lose. Only one poll this year shows Biden ahead, and that poll was commissioned by the Democrat running for governor. All other polls average out to a single-digit lead for the president. Missouri may not be Wyoming red, but make no mistake, it's red, likely Republican. South Carolina is another interesting state that has no business being here. It hasn't voted for a Democrat since 1976, and the only time one lost by less than double digits since the last 5 elections was Barack Obama in 2008, when he only lost by 9 points. Yet polls have shown President Trump's lead over Joe Biden to only be in the mid-single digits since May. A hotly contested Senate race is also on the ballot. South Carolina is likely Republican, but like a lot of GOP strongholds, this one is a lot more creaky than usual. New Hampshire has been mentioned by the media ad nauseum as being the closest of all 50 states in 2016. It was a state the Trump campaign thought that it could pick off, but polls have shown Biden ahead consistently through the year. Also, popular former governor and current Senator Jeanne Shaheen is also on the ballot. One recent poll has shown that the race is tightening, but that's just one poll, and races don't turn on one poll in early September. Show me more, and I'll buy it, but until then, the state is likely Democrat. Joe Biden has also held a pretty consistent 6 to 8 point lead over the president in Michigan, but is drastically underperforming Democratic Senator Gary Peters, who has been absolutely walloping GOP nominee John James. While the gap between the two has been steady and the state is likely Democrat, the days of the Wolverine state being an easy double-digit win for the blue team appears to be over. Minnesota has been a Democratic bastion for decades. It hasn't voted for a Republican since 1972, and that was the only time since 1956. That's why it was such a surprise when Hillary Clinton won the state in 2016 by a shockingly close 46,000 votes. A schism has developed between the state's rural towns, which overwhelmingly went for Trump in 2016, and the cities, which gave Clinton her narrow victory. This has cut the Democrats' advantage in the state dramatically. Summer polls consistently showed Biden ahead, but only averaging in the mid-single digits and not by the numbers that everyone is used to. More recently, polls have been all over the place, but all showed Biden ahead. Biden still leads, and Minnesota is still likely Democrat, but it's a warning sign that some of the blue team's troubles in the upper Midwest are not over. Wisconsin was one of the blue wall states Democrats counted on in 2016, but they shouldn't have. While the state was close, it has been trending red and should not have been the surprise it was. The recent protests and unrest surrounding the death of Jacob Blake at the hands of Kenosha police officers that led to the deaths of multiple protesters at the hands of a supporter of the president in Kenosha, as well as a supporter of his being shot and killed in Portland, was seen as playing right into the White House's law and order campaign hands. However, the opposite appears to have happened where the shootings took place. After the conventions, the president had closed the gap in Wisconsin to just under 6 points, but in the time since, Biden has regained his edge, which currently stands at just under 7 points. With many more polls on the horizon, Wisconsin, for now, is likely Democrat. Nevada is the closest of the likely states. Biden has led consistently, but in the range of about 6 points, which barely qualifies for likely status. But, as with many of the non-safe states, Biden's average has dropped from his summer high, which was about 9 points on average around late June. The interesting part about this is while Biden's numbers have dropped in the last few months, Trump's numbers haven't changed at all, with the president polling right around 40% since back in mid-June. It seems Trump's support there is pretty much locked in, where it's Biden's support that is more, for lack of a better term, squishy. Yes, I know I could say soft, but I like the word squishy. At the end of the day, or at least at the end of this video, Biden is ahead and has been for almost a year, dating back to last November, and even back then, it was only a tie. And before that, he led, likely Democrat. With the likelies out of the way, Joe Biden has a sizable lead, amassing 258 electoral votes compared to Donald Trump's 125. It should be noted, however, that last video, Biden clinched the White House with just the safe and likely states. While he's close, it's not locked up, and the president has definitely started to close some gaps. With 8 states remaining, on to the leans. Arizona is the state du jour for political pundits right now. On the Senate side, the state elected its first Democrat in over 20 years back in 2018. This year, current Republican Senator Martha McSally, who lost that 2018 race but was appointed to take over the late John McCain's seat, is so far behind this election that rumors persist that the Republican National Committee is about to tell her she's on her own and stop giving her money. Yet, the presidential race remains close. Unlike some states, Biden's lead in Arizona is trending up, especially since the Democratic convention last month, which could be directly due to his outreach to disaffected Republicans and his choice of Kamala Harris as his running mate. Biden has led consistently since March, but those leads have been wavering with an average of between 1 and 4 points. Now his lead is 5 points over President Trump, who won the state by only 3.5 points in 2016. And with that, Arizona is likely Democrat, putting Biden 1 electoral vote away from the presidency. Pennsylvania is getting closer. Biden's leads of 7 to 9 points over the summer have dropped, and the president's trend line in the state has been going up for about a month. Another concern for Democrats is a number of articles written over the last month discussing the dramatic leads Republicans in the state have in new voter registration, with a huge 4-to-1 edge since Trump took office in 2017. Biden may be the hometown boy, but Trump continues to perform much more strongly than any Republican presidential candidate in the state since Ronald Reagan. The erosion began shortly after the Republican National Convention. That said, the polls still don't show the president ahead, and Biden still has about a 4-point lead on average right now, which is the largest of all the lean states. Based on that, Pennsylvania leans Democrat, which would be enough to give him the White House. Still, Pennsylvania is a state to watch as it moves closer towards being on the bubble. Florida's needle also moved right around the time of the conventions. In fact, Biden lost a full point on his average almost overnight following the president's speech, and those numbers continue to trend up. The days of early summer when Biden held a strong 7-point lead in the Sunshine State are gone, and now Biden is barely ahead by 2 points. If those trends continue at that pace, the president will surpass Biden sometime after the first debate, making that debate even more important for the president than people think. Leans Democrat, but much less than it did 2 months ago. Before we hit the final states, I do want to touch on both second congressional districts in the states of Maine and Nebraska. Now, both states are solidly for one candidate or the other, Maine for Biden and Nebraska for Trump. However, as myself, as well as the media mentions quite a bit, Nebraska and Maine give out their electoral votes based on congressional district and who led in that district. Right now, both districts are currently advantage Biden, but polling is also sparse. Because of that, I will list them as Democrat, but only leans Democrat until we have some more data. This leaves us with the 5 most volatile states this election cycle. These are the states that I mentioned in the intro of this video, and they are Georgia, Iowa, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas. Each shows a current average lead of under 2 percentage points, and both candidates have been trading leads back and forth throughout the year in many of those states. We'll start with the state that has the largest of those small leads, Iowa. Iowa was one of the so-called blue wall states in the Midwest that fell for the Democrats in 2016. Since then, a combination of various issues, including the White House's trade war with China, have hit the state pretty hard, and the president's big, near 10-point victory back in 2016 has evaporated. Unlike many swing states, the president led most of the summer, but that lead has also been by no more than 3 points. If you graph the polls, the lines almost look like a side-by-side roller coaster. But with only a couple of exceptions, those leads have been consistently for Donald Trump. Leans Republican. Georgia has been a bit of an anomaly this election. For one, it has 2 Senate races this election instead of just one. One is a special election with support for the 2 Republicans on the ballot, combined being way out in front of the 2 Democrats combined, both of whom are in danger of not making the January runoff if no one makes it to 50% in November. The other is a tight race with a Republican incumbent that has been going back and forth, but with the Democrat inching ahead in all but one poll over the last month. To top it off, Democrats are favored to close the gap on the GOP's 4-seat lead in the House of Representatives. So it should come as no surprise that the polls have been back and forth on the presidential level as well. Focusing on polls since the conventions, however, Trump has gone out to a very small lead over the former vice president. But a lead is a lead. Leans Republican. Texas remains the biggest surprise for me of this campaign. Like other states, it has a Senate race, and that Senate race isn't even close to being competitive. As for the presidential side, as recently as 2012, Texas gave the Republican candidate double-digit wins in the Lone Star State, but demographics and an approval rating in the negatives for the president has soured a lot of the voters in the state. Texas is one of the few majority-minority states in the country, with whites and Hispanics right around 40% of the population each, with black and Asian populations pushing them into the majority. But contrary to popular belief, a large number of Hispanics are either religious or anti-socialist conservatives, and an even larger number don't vote, which is why a majority of voters every election are white, in spite of only making up 40% of the state's population. Polling has been shockingly and consistently close, with both candidates showing leads throughout the year. However, the president has led in a majority of those polls, even if those leads have been small. The 2018 congressional election suggests a pending flip to purple for the state, and those polls seem to prove this out. But they also say the president is probably ahead right now. Leans Republican. Ohio has become well known for replacing Missouri as the nation's true bellwether, correctly voting for the presidential winner every election over the last 60 years and voting against the winner only once since 1944. The state is also well known for having gone strongly for the president back in 2016, but polls show a tight race this year, something we're a little more accustomed to from them in presidential elections. That said, there have been signs of the state moving more to the right in recent history, mostly on the state level, where all major partisan offices in the state are held by Republicans. That makes Ohio a little more difficult to unravel this year. Unlike many states, Ohio's reliance on factories defies the rural/city divide I discussed with Minnesota, with some cities in Ohio offering the president greater support than he's used to receiving in metro areas. For example, Montgomery County, home to Dayton, Ohio's population of 140,000, hadn't gone for a Republican for president since George Bush back in 1988, but voted for Donald Trump in 2016. The polls have gone back and forth between the two, with Biden having come out ahead in a small majority of them, but most recent polls have shown the state deadlocked between the two when you average them. That said, Biden carried a small lead during the summer, but the president has led in all polls since the convention, when his support took a noticeable spike. So I'm showing the state, for now, as leans Republicans, but this one is going to be close. North Carolina is the most polled state this election, period. And it's not even close to being close. A staggering 44 presidential polls have been released since July 1st alone. That's an average of 4 polls a week over that 11-week span, and it came into that period already being the most polled state. Driving this media poll-feeding frenzy is not only a close presidential campaign, but the Senate race between popular Democratic nominee Cal Cunningham and arguably the most endangered GOP senator in the country, Senator Thom Tillis. as is the case in a number of states with Senate races, most notably in Arizona and New Hampshire, where the GOP candidates are being demolished in the polls. Biden is noticeably underperforming the Democratic Senate candidates. That being said, Biden has been consistently ahead in the state's polling average. Like other states, Trump's support jumped slightly post-convention, but eroded just as rapidly after reports accusing the president of disparaging members of the military who died in battle, as well as his current military leadership. The jump in Biden's support after that has leveled off and returned to post-convention numbers, which still have him in the lead. Polls this month, 18 of them in total already, and the month's only half over, have Biden ahead in 13 of them, Trump ahead in 4, and 1 is a tie, but neither has a lead greater than 4 points, and that was only one poll. The rest are all under 3. This may be the closest state in the election, and for now, it barely leans Democrat. However, it should be noted in the last election night simulation, the state was won by President Trump, which demonstrates just how close this state is going to be. That brings us to 335 electoral votes for Joe Biden and 203 for Donald Trump. The president's standing has definitely improved over the last month's video, but it hasn't made really that large of an impact on the Electoral College yet. It is impossible to ignore, however, that the race has tightened somewhat. After the Democratic National Convention, Biden was ahead on average by 9 points nationwide, but that lead has been cut by 2 points. The president's numbers nationally have been slowly trending upwards since about mid-June, but the majority of that increase has come since the Republican convention and the deaths in Kenosha and Portland. This is obviously a good map for Joe Biden and not a good one for Donald Trump, but there are things both campaigns should happily make note of and others that should give them pause. For Biden, the deterioration of support in the upper Midwest and Florida at summer's end should be a warning call. Playing for Georgia is a luxury, but it is a luxury, and at some point they may have to decide whether to keep pushing there or whether they would be better off spending time and money shoring up support in the north, specifically Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, as well down in Florida. However, the Biden-Harris camp has to be thrilled with how well the former vice president is doing in both Arizona and North Carolina, 2 states Democrats didn't even dream of picking up in 2016. While the convention seemed to have succeeded mostly in getting supporters to dig in their heels for both candidates, they both appear to have made smaller, almost targeted gains along the way. On the GOP side, the Trump camp can't be happy with these numbers, but the post-convention improvements in Florida and Pennsylvania have got to give them hope, and basically a starting point for a possible comeback, especially with the debates coming up. But those debates are also probably the last best chance the president has to recover, barring some kind of major news in October or November about a vaccine, rioting that spirals out of control, or some kind of terrorist attack. But even then, those could backfire on the White House if they're handled incorrectly. And if there is more bad news on the economic or pandemic front, things could swing in the opposite direction towards Biden really fast. It's too early to know the full impact, if any, that famed Watergate journalist Bob Woodward's book, with the president admitting on audio that he had and will continue to downplay the severity of the virus that causes COVID-19, will have on the polls and the electorate at large. That said, the gap continues to grow in Arizona, which is a big concern, because it's likely proof of concept that the suburbs are going Democratic, possibly for good, which does not portend well for the future in states like Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina. Democrats frankly smell blood in the suburban water, and it's the GOP's. Whether that's enough to offset the erosion of support in the Midwest remains to be seen.